Welcome to the Path Less Travel podcast. This week we feature the co-founder of Sports Michiana, Chuck Freeby.
Craig, great to be with you.
Chuck, when I asked you to do this, your title was Sports Director of WHME TV 46. Something's changed.
I wanted to throw you off. That was the whole idea behind this. It's been a large plot generated around this podcast. How's it going?
Well, I am super excited for this conversation. There's a lot of things I can say about you and just our friendship and just what you mean to me. And I don't know how many times you get to be interviewed. You've probably done, thousands of interviews.
Oh, I love being in your chair. The chair I'm in right now, where I have to answer questions and speak up for myself, that's not so good. But to give you a serious answer to your first question of what happened, my previous employer decided that it was going to change formats of its television programming. And because of that change of format, the services of a sports department and a production department would no longer be needed. So you sit there 7 weeks before high school football season, and as the announcement gets made, there's a clamor that people want a high school game of the week. And the funny thing is, Craig, lots of people would tell me, your phone's going to ring. People are going to reach out and hire you. And my phone did ring with well-wishers and people wondering how I was doing and everything like that, and that's appreciated. But it wasn't exactly ringing off the hook with employment offers. But Angelo DiCarlo, who worked with me for the last 15 months at my previous employer, and I decided maybe we can make a go of this in the streaming world. And so that's where Sports Michiana came about, is we will be streaming a local high school game of the week every Friday night during football and basketball season, and then an assorted spring schedule. And whereas when we were working for WHME, all the games were on tape delay, these will all be live. So for better or for worse, they will be live. And there's an excitement that comes with that. And there's a huge responsibility that comes with that. And it's something that neither one of us have done before in terms of being our own business operators. So here I am on the show, probably taking a path less traveled, at least for myself, if not for others.
Well, for any of the listeners out there that have been curious, probably not many of you, but Chuck Freeby was the one that helped me come up with the title of this podcast. So, Chuck, what I love about our time together is you never make it about you. You're always shining the spotlight on others. Been a big part of your career, so it is my intention to not allow you to do that on this podcast. We're going to focus on Chuck Freeby as much as we can.
And there I go outside of my comfort zone because, as I have said a couple of times, my role in what I do is to basically stand at the side of the road and cheer as the parade goes by. And I'm more than comfortable doing that.
Well, Chuck, tell us about just how you got into this profession. Who were maybe some key mentors along the way to help maybe take this passion and throw some fuel on it?
I realized early on that I had a love of sports. I also realized early on that I wasn't very good at sports. But one thing that I saw, one person that I saw back in the early 70s who seemed to be at every sporting event that was on TV was a guy by the name of Howard Cosell from ABC Sports. Cosell would do the Olympics. He would do Monday Night Football. That's where he rocketed to fame. He would do all the big boxing matches. He would do baseball games. It seemed as though anything that had national importance that was sports, he was at. And I thought that would be pretty cool if I could do that, if I could be a sportscaster and go cover all these things. And probably since the age of 7. That's all I ever wanted to be. Wow. I considered other things like being a lawyer or maybe even a pastor, but really my passion was sportscasting. And so I would go down to the Little League park and do the PA for Little League games. Wow. I would sit there in front of the TV and have a tape recorder, an old cassette tape recorder, probably before your time. And
yeah, you'll have to educate me on what that
exactly. is. And speak into the microphone, turn down the sound on the TV, and try to do games. This is all I've ever wanted to be. Now, fortunately, God has led me in some off directions from this where I've been able to use the talents, whatever talents I have, to help others. But this has been my life's dream.
And early on, when you started in this career, this passion, how did you just improve your skill set over your life?
Well, for one, you asked about mentors, and one of the early mentors I had was a man named Jack Laurie. And Jack was the sports director at WTRC Radio when I met him. And I met him because, I listened to all the Elkhart high school games, Elkhart Central and Elkhart Memorial games on the radio. So I knew who Jack Laurie was. And then he was coaching his son down at the Little League park. So I got to know him, and he got to know me. And he invited me to come down, I believe when I was 15, to help him broadcast an Indiana-Kentucky All-Star basketball game down at the old Market Square Arena. And all I thought I was going to do was keep stats for him, but at halftime he said, "Here with halftime stats is Charlie Freeby." And so all of a sudden I was on. And so he was a terrific mentor, and we exchanged a couple of handwritten notes probably a year up until he passed away. And he told me how proud he was of the preparation that I did. And I think I learned about preparation twofold. There was a book at the Elkhart Public Library called So You Want to Be a Sportscaster. And it was written by Ken Coleman, who was the voice of the Cleveland Browns and the Boston Red Sox. And he wrote in this book about how he went about preparing for games, the charts, the research, things like that. And I started implementing that back when I first came on the air with Vince Turner on WTRC Radio. He succeeded Jack Laurie and needed a color broadcaster and asked me if I would help him out. And back then, this is pre-internet, and you would just have to collect newspapers or go down to the public library and look at things on microfiche and try to look up information about players and teams so that you had little extra nuggets to talk about. Then when I went to Notre Dame and I was exposed to broadcasters like Harry Callis and Dick Enberg and observing them and seeing how they go about preparing for games, and basically just taking everything from them and bringing it to what I eventually did at WHME. And you would hope that over the course of time, too, as you do something, you would get better. Now, some people might question it with this podcast, but quite frankly, over the course of time, I know that I'm a better broadcaster now than I was when I started doing play-by-play 20 years ago.
Well, there's a ton of Chuck Freeby fans in the community and have been for decades. You've been at this since 7 years old. You've had a passion here. You've developed your skill set, but you've stayed in this market. Why is that?
Well, for one, this is where my family was. My mom and dad, we grew up in Elkhart, and I wanted to be able to stay close to them. My dad had health issues ever since I was in high school. And I probably would have considered if other people had reached out from other markets. And there was a time where I was kind of dissatisfied with my role at WNDU, and I wanted to look around and there was a sports director's job in Yuma, Arizona. And my wife said, well, why don't you consider that? And I said, you do understand that Yuma, Arizona is the very last television market in terms of rank in the United States. And I did. I reached out to people that I trusted and asked advice, and they said, your job here isn't as bad as you think it is. You might want to look at the blessings that you have working where you do and being able to do what you do near your family and near your friends. And I took that to heart.
Well, let's talk about family here for a bit. You've now talked about them a few different times. You're a man of incredible faith. You are a incredible father, husband, and you're more than just a sports broadcaster. Why is family just so important to you?
They're the only people that I know that love me. And honestly, many of them are receiving checks in order to do so. So that's a good thing. Let's face it, those are the people that are always closest to you. They're the people that are going to pick you up when you're down. They're the people that I try to provide for in my own household. It's why I do what I do. It's not just because I have a passion for it, but if I go out and make a paycheck, it's because I want to provide for my family. So my parents were always good to me. They put up with me doing this in their living room, talking into that tape recorder with the sound turned down, thinking, why do we have such a strange son? So, they were able to tolerate that, and I met my wife when I was working in television, and it takes somebody like that who has been in the business, I think, to really understand the odd hours that I have to work many, many times. And then my kids have adjusted to it. They always get a chuckle when somebody comes up to me as though they're starstruck, and they get an even bigger chuckle when they ask me, "Are you Jeff Jeffers?"
And I'm guessing that this didn't happen one time.
So, it's happened more than one time. In fact, Craig, it happened just a week and a half ago. And to be honest, my good friend Jeff Jeffers has been gone from this earth for about 7 years, and somebody still thought I was him, which makes me very sad from the standpoint of what must I have looked like that day.
Well, you've now talked about people, and I mean, you've got a team at home.
I do. I have depth on the roster. We have 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls, the oldest of whom, Peter, is 31 now and lives down in Greenville, South Carolina. And the youngest of whom, TJ, is 22 and recently graduated from Purdue, and hopefully by the time people will see this, will be employed.
Now that's 6 kids in the matter of, 10, 11 years?
6 kids in 9 years. The first 5 came in 5. We were like a short man's basketball league, 5 and under. And then TJ came along and made us like a tall man's basketball league, 6, 9 and under. So,
well, you've got 6 kiddos, but how about that bride of yours?
Well, Diane's fabulous. Like I said, we met at WNDU. She was a production assistant back in these days before there were readily available word processors and computers. We typed out the scripts on typewriter, and we typed them out on 5-ply paper. And she was a student at St. Mary's at the time. Her job was to come in about 3 in the afternoon, take the scripts, separate them, and then take those 5-plies to whomever would use them. And then on Friday nights, I would use her talents to help me collect scores for the high school football scoreboard. And we just got to know each other, and she's a terrific sports fan, which is helpful in my line of work. But more than that, she's just got a wonderful heart about her. She has a terrific faith. I would not be the man of faith that I am today without her. And she's the one who led me to the Catholic Church. She is the one that bolsters me and edifies me and occasionally puts me in my place. And I love her for it.
Well, let's go back, prior to 7 weeks ago, in the career change. If you're reflecting upon, and you can even incorporate that into your answer here, if you're reflecting upon the path less traveled and your journey, how do you resonate?
Well, prior to the area that I moved into and just being in TV and TV sports and having the length of career that God and employers have allowed me to enjoy, there are very few people that can say that in South Bend, Indiana. And there have been some great sportscasters that have come through here. There have been some network level sportscasters that have come through here, which is why they didn't stay for that long. But we mentioned Jeff Jeffers, and Jeff was here for 40 plus years doing sports. And a lot of people asked him the same thing. Why didn't you leave? And he would just point to that dome over at Notre Dame on top of the administration building. Jeff Jeffers loved Notre Dame, became synonymous with Notre Dame sports. For me, the reason I got hired at WNDU back in 1987 was they had Jeff and Jack Nolan already. And they wanted somebody to focus on high school sports. And I grew up in the area. I knew the area. I wanted to be on the air. And so I traipsed down there with my one tape and my one suit and did the interview and got the job. And so I think being given that niche right off the bat of you're our high school sports guy helped me fall even more in love with it. Because first of all, when you cover high school sports, everybody is happy to see you show up. When I go over and cover Notre Dame, they're not always happy to see you show up, especially if the Irish are struggling. Mm-hmm. They don't necessarily want to hear about that. But in high school sports, every team I go cover is always happy to see me and get more coverage and have more spoken about their school or their athletes. And it's a wonderful niche that I've been blessed to fall into.
When you hear the question, who is Chuck Freeby? How would you answer that?
Well, I would say, well, obviously this person doesn't watch a lot of TV, or my Q rating isn't as high as it should be. Who is Chuck Freeby? But I assume you're asking that question from the standpoint of depth. I assume you're asking that standpoint from deep down, what is my essence? And
you would be right.
It would start with a child of God, which we all are, but I think you have to remember what you're tapped into and where your roots ultimately have to be. And I really try every day to spend some, if I can't get to Mass, but I've been doing a better job of that, since my time freed up a little bit. But to try to go to daily Mass, and while I'm there, to remember that Jesus is the vine and I'm merely a branch, and I need to stay tapped into him. So ultimately, it starts with that. And then hopefully, as it says on one of my social media bios, yes, I'm a Hall of Fame broadcaster, but hopefully Hall of Fame husband, Hall of Fame father, Hall of Fame son while my parents were still alive, Hall of Fame friend, and, most of all, Hall of Fame Christian and Catholic.
As you reflect on your life here, and if you were to be sitting across the table from a much younger Chuck Freeby, what kind of advice would you give him?
Don't lose the hair. You have good hair, young Chuck Freeby. Grow that thing out, baby. That would be one piece of advice right there.
That would be one. What else would come to mind?
No, number 2 is don't be so sarcastic. I think even though we enjoy throwing jabs at each other now and then, and that is part of my personality, I worry sometimes that it is rubbed off too much on my children. And as I see that down the road, I think, okay, as a parent, maybe I should have backed off the throttle on that a little bit more, and not allowed that to creep in so much. And number 3 would be to value relationships. Build more relationships and value relationships, because really that's what life is all about. That's what my job is all about. The reason I have any modicum of success in my job is because the relationships I've been able to build with student athletes, with coworkers, with the community. And so understand that and value them more.
Well, let's talk about relationships a little bit. Who's somebody that really believed in you for the first time in your life that comes to mind?
Well, Jack Laurie, like I said, because he was willing to put me behind a microphone when I was 15 years old. Vince Turner is another one. He says, I know you're still in college and everything, but I think you can do this. Jeff Jeffers. When Jeff first approached me about working at WNDU, I was actually working for ESPN as a statistician out at the College World Series in Omaha. And Jeff was, at the time, dating somebody who was an anchor out in Omaha. So I happened to run into him at the College World Series. He said, hey, Terry McFadden's leaving to go to WSBT. Do you still want to be on the air? So he believed in me enough, even though I had not been on the air at that point, to put me on. And then my wife. My wife has believed in me in a number of ways and given me the opportunity to do things. Jerry Hammis is another person that I think of as I sit here with this awesome view that you have from your palatial estate offices up here. And Jerry, for those of you who don't know, is a Hammis, is as in Hammis Bookstore. His father, Rory, was a noted car dealer in South Bend, and that's how they built their finances. But Jerry was a very successful businessman here in town. And when I first started volunteering for the Women's Care Center as a development director, the first project they gave me was to go out and get a new computer system for them, something that could be networked. They had 3 sites, but they didn't have any way to connect them. And they figured at the time that this would cost about $5,000. Now, of course, it would be 3 cell phones, whatever. But at the time, it was about $5,000. And they wanted to see if I could raise the money. And I went to talk to Jerry Hammis, and Jerry said, I could give you the money, but I want to see if you can go out and raise it. So I'll give you a matching half. Now you have to go raise $2,500 and figure out how you're going to do it. But he believed in me. And I just saw Jerry at Rocco's maybe about a month ago and reminded him of that story. So those are people. Roger Valdesuri, the longtime sports information director at Notre Dame. I would call into the radio show that he and Jack Laurie would host in Elkhart. And when I found out I was going to be a student at Notre Dame, he said, I can give you a work-study job here that will help you pay your tuition if you work in sports information. He didn't have to do that, but he believed in me.
Well, you've been a part of some incredible moments in your life, both personally and professionally, and moments of whether it be in a game, there'd be a great run, or witnessing a great player, or a great coach, or a great team. What makes a really good moment?
Well, I tend to look at these things lots of times through the lens of a broadcaster, right? And for a broadcaster, what makes a really good moment is often the crowd reaction. You know, the late Vin Scully used to talk about when he fell in love with broadcasting was sitting under the radio and listening to the crowd noise wash over him. And we've done games together, And when you're in an atmosphere where the crowd is into the game and it's huge, and I think of the Penn Marion basketball game that we did together, or some of the tournament games that we've done where the crowd is really into it, and that shot is hit, and I don't have to say a word. The crowd, the pictures on TV tell the story. Even if you're on radio, you would hear the crowd noise, and it would tell the story. You know, the story is told that Ben Scully, when he called Hank Aaron's 715th home run, said it's gone, took off the headset, and walked to the back of the booth. And he stayed there for 45 seconds. And somebody asked him later, why did you do that? He goes, I didn't want to ruin the moment. So a moment is something that stands alone in its excellence. In our lives, maybe that moment is the birth of a child. Maybe that moment is your wedding day. Maybe that moment is a conversation that you had with a family member. Maybe it's the moment you gave your life to Christ. There could be all kinds of different moments, but it's something that stands alone in its excellence.
So as you're talking through this, what's one of your favorite moments that you've been a part of? And this is personally or professionally.
Sure. Well, I think the moment of my daughter getting her bone marrow transplant will always stay out. It was a harrowing period of time. She had been diagnosed with a blood disease known as PNH, which basically your red blood cells never stop generating because they're always seen as attacking by the white blood cells. So the white blood cells go to rub them. And it basically, as you might expect, if your body is constantly generating these blood cells, first of all, it makes you very tired. Secondly, it makes you, because your white blood cells are always on attack, it makes you very susceptible to an actual infection. And third, it puts you at a great risk for stroke. So the only treatment for this disease is a bone marrow transplant. And so for us to get the word that a match had been found, and then to know that she was going down to Cincinnati, and first they have to kill off all your red blood cells gradually with the chemotherapy, and then inject you with the marrow of a stranger that just thought that it was worth helping somebody that they wouldn't know or necessarily ever meet. And to see her survive that's a moment that stands alone. And then to know that that little girl is getting married on October 19th, that's going to be a great moment too.
I hope you saved up for that, by the way.
We're working on it. We're working on it.
Chuck, just a couple of final questions here as we wrap up. What's one of the most or best worthwhile investments you've made in your life? Time, money, or even just within your effort?
I think I gave $5 to this podcast at one point. I'm not sure.
We could use more support.
Well, it would certainly be either investments. There's no treasure in broadcasting, so it wouldn't be treasure. It would either be time or talents. And the most valuable one that the thing I'm most proud about outside of my broadcasting career is the work that I've been able to do with the Women's Care Center. For 29 years now, I have helped raise funds for this Crisis Pregnancy Center organization and had a small part in helping it grow to the largest pregnancy center in American history, now approaching 40 centers across the United States. They're opening up in Cincinnati, they'll be opening up in Omaha, and I have the privilege of basically bouncing around the country and hosting events for them and serving as an MC and just trying to help educate people on the great work these people do. I mean, Anne Mannion is the closest thing to a living saint that you have. I truly believe that there will be a cause made for her sainthood when she passes, which last word is she's in no hurry to do that. But I truly believe that you could make a cause for her sainthood for the work that she's done with Women's Care Center, and then so many other great people involved with that organization over the years, and the counselors who are there on the front lines and treating these women and families with love. And, I just did an event in Fort Wayne August 22nd, and they've been around for 20 of the 40 years of Women's Care Center, and they have had enough babies come through their facilities in Fort Wayne that they could populate Logansport, Indiana. They have matched the population of Logansport, Indiana, wow, which is about 18,000 people. So that's the greatest investment that I've made. My hope is that at some point when my time approaching the pearly gates comes, St. Peter will overlook the fact that I hung with miscreants like you and Bo Hunt and say that, you did some good things.
Final question I've got for you, Chuck. What's one of the kindest things someone's done for you?
Besides having me on their podcast?
Besides that?
So many people do so many kind things for me. Yesterday, I'm at our parish festival, and a man named Terry Taylor comes up to me and says, my son played football at Elkhart Memorial in 2003. I said, oh, they had a really good team. He goes, you're right. He goes, and he was always thrilled when you would come cover a game. And, who am I? I'm Joe Schmo from Kokomo. I'm the local TV guy who still, carries out the trash and mows his own lawn unless the unemployed son is home. And, I'm really nobody. So for the fact that people recognize me and thank me for making an impact where I can, those are the kind things. Unfortunately, people are pretty much kind to me every day. I don't know if they feel sorry for me because I look like a doddering old man, but I'm blessed.
Chuck, you've made a significant impact in this community. That's clear. We don't even have to debate that as much as you probably want to debate.
I would.
A positive impact, Chuck. If you were to give us some final thoughts on just your why that you decided to commit to a community, commit to just giving yourself to others and shining a spotlight on others, what advice would you give to a younger kid that's kind of wrestling with this?
Well, we're told in Scripture, Jesus is asked by the Pharisees, what's the greatest commandment? And number one is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul. And number two is to love your neighbor as yourself. Fortunately, I hope I do better than that, because if I loved my neighbor as myself, I wouldn't do anything for him. So to love your neighbor as yourself. And all throughout the New Testament, we have this example of servant leadership from Jesus Christ. He washes the feet of his disciples. He says, those who want to be great have to serve. And you look throughout history, Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., Bob Hope. Look at all the servicemen he went to visit war-torn areas. And then saints like Mother Teresa, people like Anne Mannion. The world is filled with a lot of people who have done a lot more than I have for other people. But those are examples that I have gravitated to over the years. And those are people that I admire. And I think if you admire somebody, you tend to gravitate to the way they do things. There are young basketball players in Mishawaka who put on your game tapes and try to do things the way Craig Heatherly did because you had success doing them. There are young football players in Bremen that put on game tapes of Bo Hunt and try to do things the way he did them because he had success doing them. Hopefully, there are young broadcasters that put on tapes of me and say, I ain't making that mistake.
We're officially the longest podcast, and this was intentional on my behalf. What final thoughts do you have, Chuck, before we wrap up, as it pertains to leadership, your journey, anything? The floor is yours.
Well, if you're going to lead, you have to listen. And I'm sorry to make you do so much of that during this podcast. But if you're going to lead, you have to listen to others. You surround yourself with great people, just like I do with the crew that we have, first on TV 46 and now on Sports Michiana. You surround yourself with great people. You surround yourself with people who are already self-motivated. You know, they ask leaders lots of times to go motivate people. And I need people that are self-motivated. And I'll tell you why. When my oldest son, Peter, was 5 years old, there was a night where he's at home and we had a casserole. And I don't know if you know much about casseroles, but no matter how great they taste, they always look awful. So 5-year-old Peter Freeby is picking at his food, and I said, I'm going to motivate the lad. And I said, Peter, after dinner, we're going to call Grandma, and only people who clean their plates are going to get to talk to her. And Peter looked down at his plate, and he looked me right in the eye, and he said, tell her I said hello. So I'm not a motivator. I need people around who are self-motivated. So you get self-motivated people who are good people, and you listen to them, you can lead them.
Well, Chuck, thank you so much for doing this. I think many listeners are going to enjoy having the spotlight on you, as you've had the spotlight on so many people of your career.
I'm not sure anybody's enjoying this. Maybe you, and that's about it.
Well, that's it for this week's episode of The Path Less Traveled with co-founder of Sports Michiana, Chuck Freeby. Chuck, thanks again.
Craig, you're welcome.